Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Nancy Lindborg, President of the United States Institute of Peace, and Stephen Hadley, Chair of the United States Institute of Peace Board of Directors.
Good morning, everybody. I am just delighted to welcome everybody this morning to the U.S. Institute of Peace. As you heard, my name is Nancy Lindborg. I'm the president here, and I am honored to be able to welcome such a distinguished group of foreign policy, national security, development experts, so many distinguished foreign dignitaries, so a special welcome to the many ambassadors who are joining us this morning. And I want to begin by thanking our sponsors and our thought partners who really helped make today possible. We had generous support, wonderful partnership. Many thanks to LMI, the Boeing Corporation, Chevron, as well as Robin and Eileen Shields West, and Nancy and Harold Zirkin for their generous support, both of this event and continued support for USIP. We're very grateful for the partnership of many think tanks who have been both good counsel and really key to helping us bring together such a diverse crowd of perspectives and ideas and backgrounds. Thanks to our friends at the American Enterprise Institute, the Atlantic Council, the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, the Center for American Progress, and the Heritage Foundation. I'd also like to thank our media partners, Politico and Sirius XM Radio. They are bringing this event to a broader public audience. And also I want to note that the event is being broadcast on C-SPAN. For those of you who are following us online or on social media, we invite you to follow along by using our mobile app, USIP Passing the Baton. You can download that on your phone. Or on Twitter using the hashtag Passing the Baton. This is the third time that USIP has hosted Passing the Baton since 2001, when Sandy Berger first passed the baton to Condi Rice. And the goal of this event is to generate ideas, to share views, to bring together the kind of perspectives that we need to discuss together to contribute to a seamless passing of the baton from one administration to the next, and at a time that we have so many pressing global challenges around the world. We are pleased especially to host the event this year in our own building. This building is the newest addition, one of the newest additions to our National Mall. And as part of our congressional charter, USIP is founded to represent the American people's commitment to peace. And this building is really a physical expression of peace as the soaring hope of humankind. So it's appropriate that we're having this conversation here today under our Answery Dove in the George P. Shultz Great Hall, next to the Madeleine Albright Wing, and looking out over the National Mall, which reminds us every day of the foundational resilience of our nation. So we're pleased everybody is here today to be a part of that. The U.S. Institute of Peace was founded in 1984 by Congress as an independent national institute dedicated to the proposition that peace is possible, peace is practical, and it is essential for our national and our international security. So we research and apply the most effective ways to manage conflict before it can become violent and to resolve it when it does. We work in conflict-affected areas around the world with local partners, helping to build peace both from the top down and from the bottom up. And for us, peace is not an abstract concept. It's what happens on the ground. It's what saves lives. It enables families to be safe and dreams to be realized. And you'll hear later today from my colleague, Sarhang Hamasaeed, who will talk about our peace dialogues in Tikrit, Iraq, which have saved lives and enabled hundreds of thousands of people to return home after the terrible conflict there, just like we were able to do 10 years ago when the U.S. Army asked USIP to mediate a peace accord among the rival tribes around the city of Mahmoudiya in Iraq, known as the Triangle of Death. So there, working with a team of Iraqi mediators who we trained and supported, USIP conducted a successful mediation that ultimately allowed the U.S. Army to withdraw 80% of its troops, to save $2 billion over the year, and most importantly, to save countless Iraqi and American lives. In Mahmudiyah, peace was possible, and today, at the 10th year of that effort, peace still holds. And now I have the great pleasure to introduce a wonderful friend, colleague, and wise counsel, Steve Hadley, a distinguished public servant, former national security advisor, and our wonderful dedicated chair of the U.S. Institute of Peace Board. Steve?
Thank you so much, Nancy. This is an amazing group of people we have gathered here today, and we are very grateful that you took the time and came. Before beginning the program, I wanted to share a few thoughts about why today is such an important day. I speak from some personal experience. I've been through a number of presidential transitions from both ends of the process, sometimes transitioning in happily, and sometimes less happily transitioning out. But either way, the process could not be more important. Each administration assumes office with both the problems and the tools left by its predecessor. And a well-managed presidential transition can help the new administration get a jump on the problems and get a better appreciation of how to handle the tools for addressing those problems. And it gives the new administration a sense of what it has to build on as it fashions its own approach to the problems that face the country. The goal of a presidential transition should be for the outgoing administration to do everything it can to help the incoming administration assume the awesome responsibilities that it is about to inherit. That's what we tried to do in 2008. President Bush made it very clear to all of us that he wanted to do everything he could to ensure as smooth a transition as possible. And President Obama has been equally clear that he expects, in his word, a seamless passing of the baton to the new Trump administration. And that transition can and should extend past January 20. The officials of the new administration should feel free to continue to call on their predecessors for advice and counsel, and the outgoing officials should be clear that they are willing to provide it. And we in this room should pledge together, for the good of the country, to focus on the substantive challenges and opportunities facing the new administration and offering it our help and support. And I would hope that the cooperation among the 5 Washington-based institutions that has produced this passing of the baton event can be expanded to include others and replicated in various forms of ongoing collaboration and discussion. And I would hope we would do this on a bipartisan basis. For the nation's security and foreign policy are strongest and most effective when they are underpinned by bipartisan support. And at the end of the day, it's not about the side of the aisle we sit on, because we must all stand together to safeguard the national security of this great country of ours. As some of you know, USIP hosted a number of private policy dinner conversations last night. The idea was to bring together senior government officials, members of Congress, representatives of the media, and leaders from across the business, think tank, and civil society communities to discuss the challenges facing our country. The conversations took place under Chatham House rules of non-attribution, but we wanted to share some highlights to set the stage for today's discussions. And for that purpose, I would like to introduce Damon Wilson, the Executive Vice President of the Atlantic Council, to give us a summary of the collective wisdom that emerged last night from our dinners. Damon.
Thank you very much, Steve. Thank you, Nancy. I want to thank the U.S. Institute for Peace, all of our partners that have helped make today's event possible, and as well as the rapporteurs, the moderators, that really helped collect the key takeaways from our conversations last night. As Steve said, my task is to offer some insights, some conclusions, and to try to summarize briefly the several hours of conversations that took place among 80-plus foreign policy leaders. Mr. Hadley, Steve set the tone. Let's see, is that a little bit better? A little bit better? So Mr. Hadley set the tone. He set the tone for last night's conversations very much as he did now by underscoring the importance of underscoring the importance of one team helping to prepare the next for success. I had a chance to work for Steve during one of those transitions and see how he set that inside government, and it very much informed the conversations last night. As one of the participants put it at the end to sum up the conclusions, count me in helping to support the next team. The premise of many of the conversations while we were there to help share experiences, insights, and to help the team succeed, there was an acknowledgement, almost a premise to the conversation, that the biggest challenge that folks are often likely to face are the ones that we're not prepared for, whether 9/11, the Arab Spring. Among the first conclusions that I think really permeated the conversations last night was that U.S. success abroad is anchored in who we are at home and our strength at home, beginning with a growing economy that creates options for us internationally, and a sense of a greater integration on security, economics, trade, and energy. The second part of that is our democracy, and can our politics help solve problems, deliver results, and do their values, our democratic values, stand strong in differentiating us from some of our adversaries? And on the military front, are we able to come together to support the investments, ending sequestration, sustaining investment in nuclear modernization? There was a back-to-basics theme, in some sense, on what makes the U.S. attractive at home, makes us influential and effective abroad. The second main conclusion, I think, from many of the conversations last night was the centrality of the U.S. role in the world, and almost a call across to a T of more leadership, not less, on the issues that are on our agenda today. Sure, a recognition of the complexity that we face, questions about the tools, whether we have the tools and imagination to deal with some of these challenges, but that we agreed that it was in the U.S. interest to do so, and acknowledged that we need to use the full range of tools, influence, power to advance U.S. interests. Our friends and allies want it, and in fact, in the absence of the U.S. acting on key issues, the situation often gets worse, and this therefore means we have to make a more intentional case with our own electorate. The third key conclusion I would argue take away from the conversations last night was that long-term strategies matter. There's an observation that some of our adversaries are very effective at having long-term strategies that span from one leader to the next, and an acknowledgement that a long-term strategy in a democracy like the United States, as Steve said in opening, requires bipartisan support, is more effective, and hence engaging our publics, the Congress, politicians in this effort is important to ensuring a sustainable, consistent approach. The fourth set of issues last night were the common analysis of challenges that are high on the American foreign policy agenda, beginning in the broadest sense with the fraying or the breakdown of the U.S.-led rules-based international order. Discussion from fragile states to hostile challengers to the rise of technology and how that impacts our effectiveness. A sense that the global system itself is in play, And therefore, there may just be an opportunity, if not a responsibility, to reshape that system in our interests, consistent with our values. Related to that, there was quite a bit of conversation about a battle of ideas, a battle of ideals, if you will. Sure, information wars, but more than that. Is the world increasingly safe for free market democracies or for authoritarians? And how do we shape those outcomes? There was a sense as well, in terms of our challenges, of the return of the nation state, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. A China that can be a challenger but also a partner, increasingly a stakeholder in this order. A Russia that's also seen as a challenger, but where there are strategic areas of cooperation, and how do you have dialogue that doesn't mean a blank check? An Iran where there is much focus more so on the future rather than the past, on strict enforcement of a nuclear deal and checking nefarious interests. And a sense that out of all the nation-state challenges we face, that North Korea may be the most likely to test. And of course, the non-state challenge, particularly from terrorism, ISIS, but it's broader than that, with a sense of high-impact, low-cost challenges to American interests. As part of that conversation, there was an interesting exchange on black swans, or blind spots, if you will, from space to genetics, genome editing, to global pandemics, or the GPS system being attacked. And there was a special conversation about what it takes for us to rise to address those challenges, and a conversation, therefore, about our alliances and our allies. A broad recognition of the unique asset that the United States has with our alliances, about how this is overwhelmingly in American interest, that it helps us deal with these challenges, and that the U.S. is a catalytic power in galvanizing other nations to solve the challenges. But also a healthy recognition that we have to reconsider some of those assumptions and ensure that our alliances and the structures are adapted for today, are fit for purpose, if you will, and that we've set sufficiently high expectations, whether it's on reform or defense investment or global engagement of our allies. To conclude, I think last night's dinner conversations really underscored a tone across folks that were both supporters of President-elect Trump, as well as opponents in the political process, that first, there are some principles that are long-standing, and therefore there will be some continuity. There also will be change, of course, but there's something to build on. Second, I think the part that reinforced all of the conversations was our strategies, our policies, our foreign policy is most effective when it does enjoy bipartisan support. Third, a real sense that there will be a need, after the noise of our election and the divisiveness of our campaigns, that there be some clarifying messages sent to the world, to our allies, so that our friends can count on us and our adversaries don't underestimate us. And finally, I'd close with a sense of optimism that pervaded some of the conversation. A complete recognition of the complexities that face the United States, the challenges of the task, but also a sense that the United States, perhaps more so than any other nation, is best prepared to help navigate this complexity, to navigate these challenges, not simply to defend the past and defend the status quo, but to play a leading role in helping to shape that future and adapt the system for our interests consistent with our values. Thank you. Turn it back.
Thank you, Damon. And you can get a sense from that really excellent summation, and thank you for doing that overnight with such articulateness, of the breadth of the set of challenges. It's hard to just narrow it down, and we do have the imperative to grapple with this so that we can play the role that the world expects us to play. Throughout the day, this event has been designed to ensure that there's truly interactive engagement. We have an extraordinary collection of opinions, of experiences, and views here in the room. So we have coming up next the first of our speakers. We will be delighted to welcome in a few moments Secretary of State John Kerry. And for the next few moments, I'd like to ask everybody to turn to your neighbors and have a conversation about what you just heard. How do you feel about what you just heard. Just a little bit of ice breaking for the audience. Talk amongst yourselves. Well, it is my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, who is a tireless advocate for peace. As a war veteran, as a Massachusetts senator who was chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and as a Secretary of State, he knows well the pressing challenges that are before us today. And joining him will be Judy Woodworth, well-known anchor of the NewsHour, and a veteran correspondent who's covered the White House for many years and knows very well the importance of having seamless transitions. So please join me in welcoming Secretary of State Kerry and Judy Woodruff.
Thank you, Nancy. I'm delighted to be here. And Mr. Secretary, I understand you sprinted across the street. Is that right?
My sprinting days are reduced, but I got here.
Well, you were spied hurrying, I'll put it that way.
Spied, right.
So the format is that I'm going to ask some questions of the Secretary for about 15 or 20 minutes, and then we're going to open it up to you in the audience. So be thinking about what you might want to ask him as well. And let's start. So, Mr. Secretary, the theme is passing the baton. I hear an echo. Are we okay with the sound here? So let's start with passing the baton. How is the transition process going? How much interface is actually taking place between your team and the incoming team? How smoothly is it going?
Well, it's going pretty smoothly because there's not an enormous amount of it. There are some people who've been in the building for a period of time, but quite candidly, I think there has not been a lot of high-level exchange at this point in time. I'm still expecting to meet with my successor at some point in the near term, but
you haven't met with him yet?
No, I haven't met with him yet.
Do you expect to?
I do.
Okay. Anything else you want to say about? I mean, when you came in, how much of a I realize it was a different situation when you were coming in from this administration, but it's like night and day. It's a different thing when you have the same administration continuing with a lot of people already in place versus a shift of parties and a complete tabula rasa restart. And so, I think in fairness that there is automatically a focus on hearings, and that's a pretty internal process. So there's time yet for ample debriefing, et cetera. I think, we don't yet know who a lot of the players are going to be at other levels. So it's been fairly limited just by definition. What are the one or two things that you wish you had known in the very beginning that you only learned later and maybe painfully?
I really haven't stopped yet, Judy, to be able to make that judgment. There's no one thing that leaps out at me that says, boy, if I'd known this, everything would have been different or something. I don't think so. We're living, what troubles me a little bit is that people are not separating a remarkable transformation that is taking place globally, naturally, from things that we're really responsible for. Let me give you an example. Arab Spring. We didn't start the Arab Spring. We couldn't have stopped the Arab Spring. There was no way to put a lid on the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring began in Tunisia when a fruit vendor lit himself on fire. And boom, a 30-year dictator was gone. And then suddenly you had Tahrir Square, and you had a bunch of people who have technology at their fingertips who are out there communicating to each other and wanting change. And that's how Syria began. People forget that. But as I listen to some of the revisionist commentary, they sort of say, well, the Obama administration didn't do this, or they didn't do that, or whatever. There's no way the Obama administration doing anything would have changed what was happening in those countries. It happened spontaneously because of where those countries find themselves relative to modernity, to the global economies, to their own governance challenges, and to the centuries-old passions and definitions and differences that have defined those societies for a long period of time. I'll give you an example in Syria. Syria is not one war. It's not one simple conflict. I mean, just follow every day what's happening between Russia and Iran with respect to Syria. But multiply that by Saudi Arabia versus Iran, and Iran versus Saudi Arabia. Iran concerns for the entire GCC. Kurds, Kurd aspirations. Kurds versus Erdogan. Erdogan's aspirations for Syria. Sunni versus Shia. People versus Assad. Israel, I mean, you have this, there are about 6 different wars that are taking place there. Some of them quite real, proximate proxy wars. And so we're living in a different world. People need to really grab onto that. The new administration needs to grab onto that. It is not a world like the world after World War II, where the United States was the only power left standing, fundamentally. And the economies of the world had to be rebuilt, and the United States stepped up and rebuilt them, to its great credit. And one of the best investments we ever made in the world was an investment that most Americans were against, called the Marshall Plan. Nobody said, wow, we ought to go help Japan that just attacked us at Pearl Harbor and we spent 4.5 years fighting a war to win. We should rebuild them, or we should do the same for Germany. But we did, and look at the value of what came out of that. So my point is simply, Judy, that I think personally that the United States is more engaged in more places, simultaneously dealing with more conflicts than at any time in American history, and I believe with consequence, with greater outcomes. Changing the policy to Cuba, helping Colombia be able to get to a peace after 50 years of war, working with Argentina and other countries to come in from the cold, dealing with North Korea, with China, working on the South China Sea, asserting the freedom of navigation rights in the region, and standing up simultaneously to bring Korea, Japan together to change the relationship. I mean, there are many, many things that are happening and have been happening that people don't take note of daily, but they're defining American interests.
But if that's the case, then how come there is still so much focus on what people interpret as a missed opportunity in Syria? I wasn't necessarily going to bring up Syria. You did.
No, you should.
But let's talk about it, because
I'm happy to have you bring it up.
when the President Obama made the decision not to act after, as many expected he would after the Red Line incident, the perception is that the rest of the world came away believing the U.S. could not be relied on, was not a reliable leader in the world. That's a different picture from the picture you're painting.
So let me take a moment. No, I'm not saying there aren't people who don't have some questions, and I'm not saying there aren't circumstances, particularly with respect to Syria. Syria is going to be debated. Okay? I know it's going to be debated because I've been part of those debates for the last 4 years. And I've been on one side of some of that debate, and other people have been on other sides, and it's going to be debated. And you all are going to get a chance to sort of make a judgment as to whether or not something different might have been done at some point or another. That's fair, absolutely fair, and it's going to happen. And I think there are some things that might have been able to have been done. But that had nothing to do with the red line. And let's make that absolutely clear, folks. President Obama never retreated from his red line. He never changed his mind about his readiness to bomb Assad to make it clear you don't use chemical weapons. Never. There's a mythology that's grown up around this. David Cameron went to the parliament on a Thursday and lost his vote in a democracy, in our special relationship partner. And so I remember being on a phone call with a bunch of Congress people, about 100 of them on a briefing phone call, and they were saying, well, you're going to come to us, aren't you? I mean, that's the Constitution, and we need to weigh in on this. It wasn't unanimous that everybody said that. There were a lot of people saying that. So what the president decided to do, Judy, was go to Congress to get their permission to do what Britain had denied the prime minister the right to do. And that's the best way, if you're going to use force, to go to use it, is have the imprint of Congress supporting you. But, we had a debate, I remember, in the Situation Room. The vast majority of the people, it may have been one dissenter or two, felt that Congress was immediately going to quickly respond because it was so urgent. But it didn't. In the meantime, I was asked a question at a press conference in London, is there any way that Assad could avoid being bombed? And I said yes. He could get all the chemical weapons out of the country. I get a call from Lavrov an hour and a half later saying, that's a great idea. We should be pursuing that. Why don't we sit down and talk and see if we can get that done? And within days, we got it done. We actually sat together, negotiated the methodology, and I remember we sat there and said, now who's going to affect it? Who's going to do this? Oh, okay. Well, the logical person to do it, entity to do it, is the OPCW. So we plugged the OPCW in, and 4 months later, the OPCW won the Nobel Peace Prize for removing the weapons from Syria. Would it have been better to bomb them for 2 days and not get all the weapons out? And today, those weapons would be in the hands of ISIL? Or was it better to cut a deal and get all the weapons out? And so if we hadn't made that deal, folks, I'm confident the president was ready to bomb. But hopefully we would have done it with the support of Congress. Now, having said everything I just said, I will readily acknowledge that this notion that the president didn't follow through took hold, and it has cost us. And I acknowledge, yes, it became a perception that became a sort of diplomatic reality, and it fed this notion that the administration wasn't there to support its ally. But it's just not accurate.
A lot of conversation here and at one of the dinners that the Institute sponsored last night here around the rest of the world is really right now looking for the United States to lead in ways that it hasn't been.
What does that mean?
What's preventing?
What does it mean? Let me just stop you for 1 sec. When you say to lead in ways that it hasn't been.
Is looking for the U.S. to lead.
Okay. Judy?
We are coming out of this very divisive election.
Yeah.
The United States looks absolutely split in half politically.
Right.
How coming out of this environment does what do you say to the next administration if you have the opportunity?
Well, we won't lead by walking away from the Iran deal and walking away from China, Russia, Germany, France, and Britain. That will not be leadership. We will not lead by turning our backs on a 186-nation climate change agreement where the world is moving to try to deal with a major problem. I mean, you say, how are you going to lead? That's how you lead. Now, we've been leading. Those agreements came under our administration. A country was racing towards the possession of a nuclear weapon in a region where if they were getting it, every other country would have gotten it, or a major country. Would the world be better off with more nuclear weapons in the hands of countries in that region, or no? We led that effort. We led the effort by going to China. First trip I made outside of Europe, second trip total for secretary, I went to China. My staff thought I was a little loony and this was an improbable mission. that we were going to get China within 2 weeks to sign on to a working group to deal with climate change. Well, we did it with a goal of getting China and the United States to be able to stand up together to announce our intended reductions of emissions so that we could lead the world to go to Paris with momentum to get done what couldn't be done in Copenhagen, if you recall. So we offered leadership on that. Russia, I don't want to, I'm not, you know, I don't want to be pejorative about anything, but Russia went into Georgia, into South Ossetia and Abkhazia, and nothing was done. No sanctions, nothing. We came in and they went into Ukraine, and we galvanized Europe and put sanctions in place. And those sanctions have taken a hefty bite out of Russia and made it clear there's a price to pay for all of this. And against many people's instincts in Europe who wanted to get rid of the sanctions, we managed to continually roll them over and keep them in place in an effort to try to implement the Minsk agreement. Now, let me go back to my point. Ebola. There was a prediction that 1 million people were going to die by Christmas of 2 years ago. President Obama sent 3,000 troops into Western Africa. We built capacity. We worked with the French. We worked with the British, who each took a country and did an amazing job. And we worked with the global community. Japan anteed up suits that protected people. We had extraordinary, China put people in. We had an extraordinary global effort, which we led. And guess what? We ended the scourge, and hundreds of thousands of lives were saved. We're on the cusp of the first generation of AIDS children of AIDS patients being born AIDS-free, because we doubled the effort begun in the Bush administration on PEPFAR. I can run around the world. South China Sea. We've been asserting the freedom of navigation rights. We've been doing that. And we've been leading ASEAN in order to maintain clarity about the importance of the freedom of the South China Sea. Same North Korea. We led the efforts to get 3 resolutions plussed up in order to put pressure on Kim Jong-un to try to change the behavior. Afghanistan. We had an imploded election. We could have had a complete and total implosion of Afghanistan and the entire enterprise there, but we negotiated. We helped put together a government of national unity, which is still there today, and Afghanistan is holding together against the pressures of the Taliban, and we've gotten everybody to renew their pledges and to continue the effort. I mean, you know, whether it's Power Africa or young African leaders or young Asian leaders or countless numbers of initiatives we've taken. We've plussed up the frontline states of NATO. We've quadrupled the budget, $3.4 billion going to the frontline states to make it clear they will be strong enough, together with NATO, to resist any kind of pressure coming from these. So, yeah, I mean, you can look at Yemen and you can look at Syria, and you can find fault with the problem that is still going on. And I'm frustrated by that, deeply frustrated by that. But as Madeleine Albright once said, and it has guided me in my tenure, and I don't say this and nor did she, with any note of arrogance whatsoever, we are, I think, an indispensable nation, if not the indispensable nation. And one of the things I've seen reinforced to me is if we're not helping to lead the effort, it often doesn't happen. On the International Syria Support Group, we initiated that. We got Russia and Iran at the table with Saudi Arabia, with Qatar, with the UAE, with Turkey. It was hard. We came up with a formula for resolving the problem of Syria. Lavrov and I negotiated a ceasefire. Unfortunately, that ceasefire required a period, not unfortunately that it required, but it required a period of calm. And 5 days into it, we accidentally bombed 70 Syrian troops, and the Russians believed that we weren't serious, that we were actually harboring Nusra, and we weren't willing to separate. And then on the weekend, the humanitarian trucks got bombed, and the thing fell apart. But it's not because we weren't leading and trying to get to the watering hole, folks. But as the old saying goes, you can lead a horse to water, you can't make it drink.
You've touched on just about every place I was going to ask you about, so thank you. And I do want to take questions from...
Well, I have a lot more in reserve.
But before we do, what are you absolutely confident most endures that this administration has done globally on the world stage, and what are you most worried about?
Well, I really believe common sense is going to win out. I mean, it doesn't make sense to, let me give you an example, the Iran nuclear agreement. There were 19,000 centrifuges spinning, producing enriched material. Now there are 5,000, which is what is allowed. There was a 12,000 kilogram stockpile from which you could have made 10 to 12 bombs if you enriched it. Now there is a 300 kilogram stockpile, limited to 300 for the next 15 years, and it is physically impossible to build a bomb with 300 kilograms of material. Iran is limited to 3.67% enrichment. You cannot build a bomb at 3.67% enrichment. So with the 130 additional inspectors who are in Iran watching what's happening, I'm absolutely confident about the route to a weapon being blocked. Now, if that were just arbitrarily undone, we're going back to a place of conflict almost immediately. We'll also reduce our credibility in the world because I suspect the Russians and the Chinese and the French and the Germans and the British will just continue the deal. And we'll be sitting there outside with our credibility grossly damaged, and with Iran saying, well, we live by the agreement, but now the United States isn't willing to, so we're going to do what we're permitted to do. And then you're right back where you were, where we had pressures on us to go bomb Iran. Believe me, there were pressures. So it doesn't make sense. And I believe reason will win out. Same thing on the Paris Agreement, on climate change. I mean, look, I've been following the climate issue since 1980, whatever. And I've been to most of the conference of the parties, and I think I understand the science pretty well. Almost unanimously, scientists now know that human beings are causing the problem of climate change. Look at the storms in the West Coast today. Last year, we had $27 billion spent on storms. It's a huge increase over the past. Every year, we spend $55 billion in America to cope with acute asthma that comes from air quality, which comes from coal-fired and fossil fuel-fired plants. So from a health point of view, from a national security point of view, from an environmental point of view, from every bit of science that is coming at us, we need to deal with climate change. So again, I don't think that in the end people are going to move away from that because it's real and the rest of the world is moving towards it. And the bottom line is, there are millions of jobs to be created in the transition to a clean energy, alternative energy society. And if we don't pursue it, I guarantee you China, India, other countries are going to pursue it, and they will pursue it to our detriment and loss economically and otherwise.
Just quickly with China, what are you confident will endure and what are you worried may change?
I think China, we proved that I think the climate thing will endure with China. Absolutely. And I think that the management of this complicated relationship with China has been very effective. I think the Chinese would tell you that we have managed to cope with differences by understanding them, defining them, and putting them in a place, and making a conscious decision that we didn't want them to flare up into a conflict, while finding the things where we could cooperate most effectively, whether it's North Korea, where we incidentally think China could do more, or climate change, or development issues, or health issues, or other issues, the Iran nuclear agreement. By the way, China is being extremely helpful on the Iran nuclear agreement, helping to design the new plutonium reactor, so it cannot produce weapons-grade plutonium, and they've assumed leadership role on that. I mean, this has been a new kind of partnership. And Russia, likewise. Even as we see this tension with Russia, and obviously this horrendous invasion of our democratic process, we were able to cooperate with Russia on getting the chemical weapons out of Syria, on getting the Iran nuclear agreement done, on creating the largest marine protected area in the world in Antarctic, on dealing with the airlines emissions reductions agreement, on dealing with the Paris agreement, on dealing with the Kigali agreement on refrigerants. So we've actually found a way, even with Russia in the midst of this, conflict, to make progress. And that's an important message.
Clearly a moment of great tension right now with Russia. All right, let's take questions from the audience. If you want to stand up, they're going to bring a microphone to you quickly and give me your name. Yes, sir, over here. Here, let's go here first.
Kerry, you gave a great response to the U.S. leadership and the accomplishments. But the fact that question was asked, and was asked in the last few months and in the world, the question is, should more have been done to get this message across to the people here and internationally, what you just said?
I think we probably should have spent more time messaging on it to a degree, although I'm not sure with the current framework of communications that would have made that much difference. One of the greatest challenges we all face right now, not just America, but every country in the world, is we are living in a factless political environment. And every country in the world better stop and start worrying about authoritarian populism and the absence of substance in our dialogue, if you call it that. There's a long, well-defined history of what happens when you have economic fear and pressure and a level of exploitation of those fears coupled with sectarian or ethnic exploitation and a kind of simplistic sloganeering politics.
What can the U.S. do about that?
Well, we're going to have to fight for it. I think a lot of people are struggling with what do you do about it. If policy is going to be made in 140 characters on Twitter, and every reasonable measurement of accountability is being bypassed and people don't care about it, we have a problem. And it's not just our problem here in the United States, it's all over the world. I mean, do you realize in the entire presidential campaign here in the United States of America, there wasn't one question asked about climate change? In 3 presidential debates and 1 vice presidential debate, not one question. Stunning. What are you going to do about the environment? What are you going to do about climate change? Not once. So this is a huge problem, folks, and we're all going to have to figure out how we are going to restore a measure of accountability to our system.
You think that can be done?
I might add, I mean, this whole issue of the norms of how we go through a nominating process. We have a whole bunch of hearings that are taking place without any, and I'm stepping beyond my bailiwick, but it's quite amazing to me when I think of the hoops I have to jump through with respect to paper submitted and documentation and tax returns and a whole bunch of things. Suddenly, that's gone poof, and it's not as important. So I think we have a lot of reckoning to do in our country in the next days and months, and I can assure you that when I'm out of this office, I'm going to spend time, along with a lot of others, trying to focus on it.
You think a lot of people are getting a free pass coming in the incoming administration? Yes or no?
Oh, I thought I got by that one.
I can bail you out. Greetings, Secretary Kerry. I'm a high school teacher from North Carolina, and you just talked about how when we use a medium like Twitter, we strip important issues of their complexity. So I have a question that comes directly from my students. One, they want to know what's an important international issue that you'd like for them to study, and two, they want to know, after they study it, will you Skype with them?
I'd like them to study the EU, Europe, right now, and I'd like them to study Brexit and how they think it works. And then I'd be delighted, because I'll no longer be secretary when I Skype with them.
So,
okay?
So no, you will Skype, but no tweeting, is that right?
I think they should do that. I mean, I think there are some big questions on the table, sort of, you know, China, Russia, spheres of influence is a big question. Global governance, failed states, increasing numbers of failing states, and corruption, huge issue. And where is the accountability going to come from that, you know, creates better governance, greater stability, more response to citizens in various places? Those are worth studying, all of those things. The new platforms of communication, you know, how is democracy going to move faster and more efficiently given the increasingly hard task of building consensus without the consumption of facts? I mean, these are, I can run through a list like this. These are all things that just leap out at me as I come out of this job. There are some fascinating, challenging issues out there, and the more input we can get from young people, the better it will be.
Another question right here.
Thank you. So I'm a former refugee from Kosovo, now a U.S. citizen. So I want to ask a question about refugees in the world, which is the biggest number since World War II, and expected more because of climate change and conflicts around the world. What is the perspective of the refugees and what this country should be doing with allies? And the second, Mr. Secretary, what worries you the most by leaving the office? What are you going to lose sleep as, not because of this administration, but where the world is today?
Yeah. What worries me the most is that I won't be there.
You mean because nobody else can do the job?
No, I'm joking. I'm just joking, okay. Honestly. No, that's the other thing you learn in life and in this business. There are always other people who can do every job. And it's a good thing to learn. I believe the answer to your question is partly found in what I decided a little way back, about a year and a half, 2 years ago. We had just written our whatever number of check to cover the cost of refugees in Syria. And I think, and we are the largest donor. The United States of America is proudly the largest donor in the world to the global challenge of refugees. And I say global because Turkey puts many billions of dollars into taking care of the refugees, or in Turkey. But we contribute to other countries to take care of them everywhere. And I just said to myself, you know, this is crazy. We can keep writing checks, and we can keep more refugees pouring into Europe, and Europe is going to see its politics vastly altered by this. And so writing checks is not a solution. That's when I decided to try to put together the International Syria Support Group and bring people to the table and say we have got to end the war in Syria. And the solution to the problem of all these refugees, in my judgment, is a macro policy that we need to embrace, all of us, in the developed world and developing world even. Now, I'm going to step way out here. I believe we need urgently a new Marshall Plan, which is focused on the most critical states in the world in certain locations, particularly Middle East, North Africa, South Central Asia, where we have got to push back against a huge youth bulge. There are about 1.5 billion children in the world under the age of 15. Somewhere upwards of 400 million of them will not go to school. And that is a problem for all of us. I remember talking to one of my fellow foreign ministers in Northern Africa, I won't say which country, and I asked him, I said, you've got a pretty large Muslim population here. How do you manage it? Are you concerned about it? And he said to me, we're scared stiff about it. We're worried about it. I said, why? He said, well, the extremists pay money to grab these young kids, 13, 14, 15, and they separate them from their families and they indoctrinate them. And then once they're fully indoctrinated, they don't need to pay them anymore. They send them out to be the next recruiting wave. And they get the next wave. And he said they have a 35-year plan. Then he said, we don't even have a 5-year plan. And that's the problem, folks. That if we have a whole bunch of countries in which a bunch of people are simply going to be left to the devices of people who have a very different mission from the rest of us, we're going to inherit that because of our role of leadership, because there are no borders, because we've seen already what happens with the internet and how you can proselytize and mobilize and inspire. So we have to counter it. That's one of the things we have quietly done in this administration. We now have lowered to a trickle the number of people being recruited by Daesh, ISIL. And we've done it by opening different centers in different places that are communicating in the indigenous language with indigenous population reaching out, by putting new images up, by countering the narrative. And it's a very proactive major engagement. But still, if you don't get those kids into school, if you don't provide economic opportunity, if their lives don't improve, in a world in which almost every human being has access through that little rectangular instrument we all carry around, they all can see what everybody else in the world has, which also means they know what they don't have. So that is a massive tool of change, which we saw in the course of the Arab Spring. So I think we've just seen the first wave of this. If we continue to have dictators change constitutions and try to stay in office, if we continue to see a moving away from the fundamental order and structure that the world worked so hard to create ever since World War II, and which we have organized ourselves around, we have to care about those things. And so when you ask me one of the things I worry about, I worry that this next administration, when you talk about America first, yeah, we all understand what that means and comes from, but if it means turning away from these other things, we have a problem. So I think that, I'll give you an example. The State Department has a $51 billion budget. $22 billion of that goes to USAID. Everything we do in foreign policy in the United States of America is about 1 penny on the dollar of what we spend. And I think that's insanity in the world that we live in today. So we've got to plus it up. Now, people say, oh, how can we afford it? We have a deficit. We have this and that. We need to take care of things here. We are taking care of things here at home when you take care of these other issues. Because we spent a couple of $1 trillion in Iraq and Afghanistan because of things that came from somewhere else to affect us here. So if we don't decide that there's no longer an over there and an over here, there's just an everywhere, and we're all connected, we're in trouble. And so I'm for investing, because in the long run, that investment pays off 100 million different ways. and it saves us money, and it saves us the treasure of sending our young people to some other country where we have to fight because we didn't do what we could have done early on and preventively. So I think this is the big challenge for all of us. We need to do more, and we need to get other countries. China can do more. By the way, China has agreed to cooperate with us on co-development in the world. This is another defining thing that has come out of this management of our relationship. So we could actually co-develop in certain places and leverage, I think, other countries to come to the table and be involved. But no one is immune from this. You know, we need to work together to come up with better pedagogy for teaching, to get more teachers, to get, you know, more health structure in place in countries, because that builds stability. And I think that that's the way we will make the greatest difference to our security in the long run.
Mr. Secretary, thank you. I'm told that we are out of time. It sounds like you're saying these are some of the issues, though, that you want to work on after you leave office.
Yeah, I'm trying to find out how, you know, so what the best way of doing that is, but yes.
You're going to start your own organization?
No, I don't want to start my own thing. You know, I want to find the right thing to do within the context of something that's there, I think. You know, I did that when I came back from Vietnam, and you spend as much time trying to keep the telephones working and the office open as you do trying to get done what you want to do. So you know, I've learned a little, I think I've learned something.
Secretary of State John Kerry, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nancy. Great.
Thank you to Secretary Kerry for his tireless leadership. You've just heard an extraordinary summary of his 4 years and 8 years of the last administration at a time of great complexity, lots of challenges that face us today and will face the next administration, from climate change to great power conflict to the kind of fragility that's leading to the world on fire today. What a wonderful way to start our morning. It's really laid down the critical issues that we'll be grappling with for the rest of the day. We have our first panel coming up, followed by when we will be joined by National Security Advisor Ambassador Susan Rice and National Security Advisor Designee Lieutenant General Michael